Welcome back to the Out for Smokes podcast. And Sean, welcome back from the longest shit, I guess, that you've ever took in your life.
Yeah.
What happened? We're starting the episode 30 minutes late because you thought I was in the stall next to you.
Yeah, I thought you were still shitting and I had more time.
Sean thought it was your dick he was sucking.
He kept tapping his foot on the floor.
Wait, if you're here, then who was there?
Who's fucking me in the ass?
Bitching about Israel to someone in the stall next to him. Little fart.
What'd you think we were supposed to leave the bathroom together?
No, I just assumed.
Okay.
I didn't want to wait. I assumed if you were still there, then I had time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because we couldn't start the episode if you were still shitting.
Right. So you were like, let me just kind of
Take
relax a little bit.
Keep pushing, wait a little longer.
That's the thing. You don't get a lot of chances to sit down nowadays.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, there's no public places to sit.
Were there feet in the stall?
No, well, no. But I didn't see you leave the bathroom when I went in, and you said you were going to take a shit.
I used the other bathroom.
You went to the other bathroom.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't feel like we need to shit next to each other.
Oh, wait, sorry. Johnny's trying to talk to us.
Oh, okay.
Oh, dang. Okay.
Oh, we lost
We're
that
gonna
perfect
lose that.
shit
That was
riff.
the-
Lost
that
the
was
perfect intro.
I can.
The perfect shit intro?
Now we have to read. Son, if you're listening, I'm dead. But I left you this podcast. You'll be all right. Just pretend that I went out for smokes. Israel has invaded Rafah, and we're taping this on May 7th, 2024, and Israel has started their invasion, and I just, the images coming out are they're very bad, they're very horrific, and I don't know how you can, I don't know, especially if you're a parent, I don't know how you can look at those kids and, not worry that the violence is coming back to your children.
No,
You know?
no.
I don't know how people are not afraid, or I don't know what makes people think that their kids are any more special or more deserving of life than these children that are being so wantonly slaughtered.
Yeah.
I'm not really good with words in that way. I'm not very good at,
No, but you're making a good point. Violence done abroad historically always comes home.
Yeah.
You know, the violence of the Roman Empire comes home,
Yeah.
Britain, Germany, etc.
Yeah.
And so it's like when they're justifying this mass murder of children over there, it's historically pretty inevitable that this kind of stuff it comes home. I mean,
Yeah.
because once you start justifying that kind of killing, I mean, it leads you down to all sorts of dark pathways.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I thought we would have 2 informational episodes this week because I read 2 books and I thought it was important I brag about that.
Mm-hmm.
But so on this free one, we're going to talk about the Isreal Lobby. And then speaking of pedophile cults, on the Patreon, we'll have an episode about the Finders cult. And I think they're, they are informational episodes, but I think they're important and worth doing because in the case of the Finders cult, this is a sex trafficking and child trafficking, child sex abuse cult that was busted in the late 80s for doing those things. And then it was protected by the CIA and the FBI. And they were, everybody who was arrested was let go. They were allowed to keep trafficking kids and sexually abusing kids. We still have no idea why the CIA and FBI protected them, but they did. And it's a crazy story. And that will be over on patreon.com/outforsmokes. So we'll go through that. But then on this free one, I thought the Isreal Lobby was an important subject because, I mean, probably similar to Mike, since October 7th happened, I've just kind of been trying to understand why, which is, we see these nonstop Israeli atrocities and the U.S. is either unable or unwilling to even slightly rein them in. And so what explains that? And then the best explanation I have found so far comes from this book, The Isreal Lobby, by John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt. It was written in 2007, so it's slightly out of date, but it's basically the same story today, but even more so lopsided in Israel's favor. And I'll just kind of go through some of my takeaways from the book on this episode, and you guys can jump in at any time with comments, questions, ask me to elaborate. I'll try my best to do so. But I think the most revealing quote from the book is they quote an official from the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, or APAC, which is the strongest group in what makes up the Isreal Lobby. They quote this guy who is a high official there named Stephen Rosen. And in 2005, he told the journalist Jeffrey Goldberg, quote, or they were at a bar together, and he told him, quote, He hands him a bar napkin and says, in 24 hours, we could have the signature of 70 senators on this napkin. And the point is, whatever APAC wants to get passed by the U.S. Congress, they can get passed by the U.S. Congress. And the two most recent examples would be the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which, bans the Bible and bans the First Amendment. That got passed through the House overwhelmingly. And then also the TikTok ban, which is something a big thing Israel lobbied for, was to get TikTok banned because there's so much anti-Israel content or pro-Palestine content on there. And they got both of those things. And so, there's a lot of different places to go in the book. It makes a lot of different arguments. But you could just kind of look at the very exceptional relationship Israel has with the U.S. It's the only recipient of U.S. foreign aid that doesn't have to account for how it spends it. It spends a lot of that U.S. foreign aid just building illegal under international law settlements in the West Bank. For 4 decades, it's been the largest recipient of U.S. aid. It's received $260 billion U.S. dollars as of October 2023. Another $26 billion in aid to Israel was just signed into law this year. Between 1976 and 2006, the U.S. has vetoed 42 UN Security Council resolutions that were critical of Israel, and it's vetoed plenty more since, and certainly several more since October 7th. They argue that U.S. strategic interests are not served by protecting Israel. Mearsheimer and Walt, they talk about how supporting Israel unconditionally doesn't help U.S. strategic interests in the Middle East. They identify U.S. strategic interests in the Middle East as keep the oil flowing, discourage the spread of WMDs, reduce anti-U.S. terrorism. They say the Isreal Lobby undermines all of those three. And they say that the pre-1990s U.S. strategy was to keep the U.S. military, quote, over the horizon, which was we didn't actually have troops deployed in Syria or Iraq. They were all just kind of kept over the horizon, and then when we needed to, such as the Gulf War I, we would come in and, bomb and deploy and then pull back out. But they say that it's in the interest of Israel to actually have U.S. troops in the actual Middle East so that other people can shoot at them and that the U.S. is drawn into Israel's conflicts. And then just like an actual definition of what is the Isreal Lobby. The Isreal Lobby they define as a loose and sometimes conflicting coalition of individuals and groups seeking to influence the U.S. government to better serve Israel's interests. Very important to say, not entirely Jewish. It's arguably not even mostly Jewish. The most powerful group within the lobby is APAC, but the largest is this group Christians United for Israel. It was founded by a Christian pastor named John Hagee. Has over 7 million members. These are all Christians United for Israel because they believe it's going to bring about the end times. There's the three main, Mitchell Bard is a foreign policy analyst. He identifies the three main organizations in the Isreal Lobby as APAC, Christians United for Israel, and then this group, the Conference of Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations, or Conference of Presidents. This was founded in 1956, comprises more than 50 national Jewish organizations, and they meet and they try to find a consensus among all these national Jewish organizations for lobbying the U.S. government.
So there's no oil in Israel, right?
No, Israel has no resources, which is like you can look at another nation like Saudi Arabia, which the U.S. mostly lets do what it wants, but Saudi Arabia has a ton of oil. It has a ton of natural resources. It's very unclear, at least initially, and I think the Isreal Lobby book has the best explanation as to why this country with like no resources, nothing we really need, is allowed to do whatever we want, whatever it wants.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk about this idea that because I remember when Chelsea Handler made that video with Noah Tishby, and there's this idea that we need Israel because they're our defense against terrorism or whatever it is.
Right.
What's the thinking there?
Right. The book is 350 pages, and a lot of it is just very patiently going through how all of that is bullshit. Mm-hmm. They talk about, with regards to terrorism, how supporting Israel creates more terrorism. I mean, we've talked about the bin Laden letter. A lot of anti-U.S. jihadis, their primary complaint about the U.S. is U.S. support for Israel, U.S. support for the oppression, subjugation, and murder of the Palestinians. And the book goes through, among other cases, the Iraq War, U.S. relations with Iran, U.S. relations with Syria, U.S. relations with Lebanon. And kind of in each of these cases, what you see is the interests of the Israeli state kind of trumping at least the long-term strategic interests of the U.S. state. Just for an example, in Lebanon, Israel invaded Lebanon in 2006. And what's kind of forgotten is right before that, in 2005, Lebanon had what is kind of called derisively a color revolution. In the case of Lebanon, it was called the Cedar Revolution. But this was a mass, peaceful uprising among the population that actually kicked out the pro-Syrian government in Lebanon, and in the elections in 2005, elected a new government that was actually U.S. friendly. Like even despite the Iraq War in 2005, the majority of the people in Lebanon had a very positive view, or at least a positive view of the United States. And then in 2006, Israel invades Lebanon, and they just start, for 34 days doing mass murder. And the polling before and after is stark, and it's included in the book, but you see the people of Lebanon go from having a positive view of the U.S., majority positive, to an overwhelmingly negative view of the U.S. And this government that was pro-U.S. is completely undermined and sidelined, because now everybody hates this pro-U.S. government, and they love Hezbollah, because Hezbollah is fighting the Israelis. And I did just want to say one thing. Regarding the 2006 Israeli invasion of Lebanon, it was 34 days. They killed about 1,100 people, mostly civilians in Lebanon. They forced about 250,000 refugees to flee their homes, and they were able to come back for the most part at the end of the conflict. But that's in a month. They killed about 1,100 people. And there's still like all this denial about the scale of what Israel is doing in Gaza, because that's 1 month. And this was widely condemned at the time. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, they laid out all these war crimes Israel did in these 34 days. They killed 1,100 people in a month. They are killing at least 10,000 people a month in Gaza. Like, this is minimum 10 times the scale. And I think it's more than 10,000 a month. And I think there's still just like real denial about the scale of atrocity that Israel is committing right now.
Yeah, I guess it's like, are people in denial because it doesn't really like make sense? Like it doesn't, like if you kind of follow the logic, it seems like they're trying to kill or displace every single person, but that doesn't really. It's like who has the time? Like who thinks that's a good idea?
Yeah, I think there's denial for a variety of reasons. I think part of it is like, if we look at the truth, then there's it makes us uncomfortable about what we're doing about it, essentially.
There's like responsibility and culpability.
I mean, it's like, it's a trite question at this point, but, what would you do during the Holocaust? Yeah. And I was thinking about that today, and my answer is I would post about how the Holocaust is bad.
I mean, what else could you do?
Yeah. I would say I would make a joke about how when John Fetterman was in therapy for depression, a train of men had sex with his wife, and then I would get up and go to my job the next day.
Yeah.
And that's what I would do about the Holocaust if I was alive then.
Yeah. I mean, it's better than nothing.
I guess so.
Yeah.
But and I also want to say, like, this book, it's 350 pages or just over. About 20 pages of this are them being like, by the way, we are not anti-Semitic.
Sure.
We actually support Israel's right to exist. We're pro-Israel. They spend at least 20 pages doing that. And of course, all the same, it was accused of being a new Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a new blood libel. They were accused of anti-Semitism, all sorts of, like, essentially no matter what you do, these pro-Israel fanatics are going to accuse you of doing the Holocaust. Like Mike Johnson, the House Speaker today, he talked about college campuses. If you go through them, you could hear the screams from the gas chambers. I mean, these people are fucking insane.
Yeah.
Like, they are just taking the Holocaust and using the victims of it to justify another genocide.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the Isreal Lobby itself, as I mentioned, it's the individuals and groups, loose, sometimes conflicting coalition, seeking to influence the U.S. government to better serve Israel's interests. But
can I just ask real quick, like, has Rafah been any kind of like has it been any kind of like a turning point? Like, has it made you change anything? Because to me, it feels like Rafah is kind of the last area that they can really go into, right, and bomb, and it's the place where there's the last place where there's people.
Yeah.
So does it make you go like, oh, they're really going for it?
Yeah, I mean, I keep hoping at some point it'll be too much for President Biden and the White House, because they could very well lose in November over this.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep hoping at some point somebody will put a stop to this, because what's been done, I think there's already over 100,000 dead.
But who could stop it aside from like aliens?
Well, it would have to be the United States. It would have to be the U.S. saying, we are not going to supply you with any more weapons, or we're going to, like, time is up, make peace.
Yeah.
That's the U.S. government is the only entity that can stop it at this point. Or I guess Hezbollah or Iran, if they really wanted to step up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that doesn't seem like something that'll happen, though. It just seems like everybody is so not even like compromised, but just personally very weak.
Yeah,
and cowardly.
Well, it's just like...
Yeah, you go, they're killing all the Palestinians, and they go, well, some actually got out of there, and so there's still Palestinians in the world. And you go, what the fuck are you saying right now? Yeah.
It doesn't seem like...
They're not extinct. They think genocide means extinct on Earth.
Right.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem like anybody has the balls to even suggest, like, hey, can you tone this down a little bit?
Yeah.
Do you
Well, I
think
mean, it felt like constant reports of like, oh, yeah, the Biden administration is saying knock it off. And then it was like, and then Nahu was saying
it doesn't
no.
feel like anybody's saying knock it off.
It feels like no one has asked him to stop.
Yeah.
Like they're pretending. No, yeah, I did it. Like when your wife asked you if you did something and you didn't get to it yet.
Yeah.
No, yeah, we've been asking them. And they're like, remember to text Netanyahu.
It's like your 3-year-old has a Glock and he's shooting people at the mall, and you're like, no, yeah, I asked him to tone it down.
Yeah, you're just worried about being a bad dad.
Just handing him more clips. Like
Yeah.
I've really had a stern conversation with him about this.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to say was it is important that they mention that the Isreal Lobby not only influences the policy-making process in the U.S. with regard to Israel, but it also influences discourse in the U.S. with regard to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And like they talk about, they gave an interview recently, the two of them, and they talked about kind of there's more of an emergence of alternate media now, such as TikTok, where you hear more Israel criticism. But when the book was written, the mainstream media was just entirely pro-Israel, and that's still kind of the case, where they make the point that there are 0 pro-Palestine full-time columnists, op-ed columnists at the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, the Wall Street Journal. Every op-ed you read on this issue in those papers, like occasionally they'll have a guest come in and maybe criticize Israel, but the people who are actually writing op-eds full-time, they are all pro-Israel, every single one. And that's partly because, as documented on page 172-3 of the book, the Isreal Lobby and its various organizations, they'll organize letter-writing campaigns, boycotts, demonstrations against media outlets that are viewed as anti-Israel.
Try to get my shows canceled at Teehees in Des Moines.
Yeah, or that guy who directed Zone of Interest when he made the speech accepting the Academy Award and criticized Israel and said, don't use the Holocaust to justify genocide in Gaza. Like, he got a storm of criticism and called a self-hating Jew and everything else. So yeah, it's influencing the policy-making process, but also influencing the discourse. And part of how they influence the policy-making process is they exercise a lot of control over who's actually appointed to various government jobs. Like one example, not in the book, but the authors have talked about it since, was there was this guy named Chaz Freeman, who in 2009 Obama nominated him to chair the National Intelligence Council, but Obama had to withdraw him because he had
caught harassing a halal cart vendor.
Obama had to withdraw him because he had criticized Israel. So, and you see a lot of that, or that kind of thing happen, where they will make sure everybody, and that's another point about why the Biden White House is still so pro-Israel, is like the people who staff the Biden White House, APAC and everyone else, they vetted them first to make sure these are all pro-Israel. We're not going to let any pro-Palestinian people sneak in there. And like APAC, they don't give money directly to candidates, but they guide other political action committees. Like in 1987, the Wall Street Journal found that there were 51 pro-Israel PACs that were operated by APAC officials. Because APAC pretends they don't control money, they don't, direct these other things, but at least in 1987, there were at least 51 PACs that the officials at APAC were managing. And so what will happen is if you want to run for Congress or Senate or whatever, any office really, APAC will send you a questionnaire, and it'll say, like, what do you think about Israel? What do you think about this Middle East issue? Blah, blah, blah. And depending on your answers to that questionnaire, they will direct their affiliated PACs that they actually do control to send you money. Or if you don't give the right answers, you won't get any money. And APAC, of course, pretends they don't do this, but, we all know they do. And, I mean, we had Norman Finkelstein on, and I kind of asked him the same question, and, he about, like, why the U.S. public is so opposed to what's being done in Gaza, but the politicians in the U.S. are so lined up in favor of it. And, in his, unmimicable way, he said, like, well, the Jews have a lot of money. And, I'm paraphrasing him. But essentially, like, what he was saying is that U.S. elections are just entirely corruption contests. You need so much money to run for Congress or Senate or whatever, and the Supreme Court has basically loosened all the restrictions on money, so you just need wealthy benefactors. And APAC is a lobby, and the various organizations in the Isreal Lobby, they do have a lot of money, and there are a lot of very rich Israel fanatics. Just like, for one example, from The Economist, between 1990 and 2004, pro-Israel groups, and this is 2004, so this is even before Citizens United and really the floodgates of money opened up. But 1990 and 2004, pro-Israel groups contributed $57 million to various U.S. candidates and parties. So that's $57 million. While Arab American and Muslim groups contributed less than $800,000. Mm-hmm. So more than 57 times the amount of money. If you're a U.S. politician, maybe you give a shit about the Middle East, maybe you don't. But there's more than 57 times the amount of money being on the pro-Israel side than there is being on the Palestinian side.
But 75 years ago, Jews didn't have as much money or political power, right?
Yeah.
So do you think after the tide shift, Arabs will have that political power and they'll fund our podcast?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think long run, yeah. This can't really hold.
It can't really hold.
Yeah, but it's just a question of how many people have to die first.
Yeah.
Anyway. But yeah, there's just a couple other things. I mean, there's a few. There's plenty of things, but like striking takeaways from this book. American Jews in general tend to be more liberal. Like most American Jews by polling favor a two-state solution. Most American Jews are Democrats, kind of like pro-choice, liberal people. However, the American Jewish organizations that make up the Isreal Lobby tend to be very right-wing, very hardline. And the book attributes this to a shift by the Israeli government in the 1980s. And they talk about particularly this Likud party, which was a right-wing party in Israel. The Likud party, the Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, he was Prime Minister from 1983 to 1984, as well as from 1986 to 1992. But he's a right-wing Israeli guy, and he moved to ensure that these organizations like the Conference of Presidents and APAC were chaired by conservatives. Like, he made sure that conservatives were in control. He made sure that more hardline groups with regards to Israel in the U.S., more hardline groups were given more access, greater attention by Israeli officials. Like, he really deliberately cultivated American Jewish organizations to make sure that the hardliners would receive the most direct support, the most access from the Israeli government. And they make the point in the Isreal Lobby that the APAC board is controlled by donation size. So the more you donate, the more influence you have on the organization, the more power within the organization. And pro-Israel fanatics tend to be wealthy, and the more fanatical you are about something, the more money you're willing to spend on it. If you're indifferent to Israel, you probably, or just kind of lukewarm, you probably won't put up as much money as if you are a fanatic.
Yeah, that's like me with Trader Joe's mini ice cream cones. What do you think of a two-state solution? When you hear two-state solution, does that seem like something viable? Because I feel like it isn't.
I don't think it's viable anymore. I think like, and again, another part of the book is the closest we came was at the end of President Clinton's term in 2000 or like early 2001. Yasser Arafat and Ehud Barak, the Israeli prime minister then, they were negotiating. up until January 2001. And the book makes clear that Ehud Barak walked away from the talks. Yasser Arafat was willing to keep talking under what were called the Clinton parameters. But basically, they were going to finally, the Palestinians would get a state. They'd get about 95% of the West Bank. But why Arafat couldn't quite accept the deal was because it would be dissected, like the Israelis would, have dissections to keep it apart. And also the Palestinians couldn't have any army or the security force would be heavily limited. Essentially, the Israelis would still control the fucking thing. And so Arafat has this quote about, if I sign this, you'll be marching behind my coffin at my funeral. He was saying, I want to do it.
His people would kill him.
His own people would kill him. And it's that was probably the last time. And I think, it probably could have been viable at some point, but a big point of the book, and I think the history is indisputable on this point, is that Israel has always undermined the two-state solution. Benjamin Netanyahu and many other right-wing politicians in Israel have always been fanatical about we can never allow a Palestinian state.
Yeah.
And
well, I saw a video on TikTok of all places, and this young girl was saying that there's 700,000 settlers in the West Bank. So it's so you're going to partition that off and then leave all these people who are living in the West Bank? That doesn't really make sense. So it would have to be a one-state solution, and you would have to have one state where everybody has equal rights and they're all represented in the government.
Yeah, I mean, the solutions are either one state, pluralistic one state, which the Israeli fanatics would never allow. I mean, maybe they could be forced into it, we would see, but it's a one-state solution.
And how am I forced into it?
I don't know. I mean, I guess...
you're talking about a big...
Just them refusing to put their shoes on at the door like little kids.
Yeah. You're talking about a big quick decision that could maybe come out of a plane.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, it really does sound like the clouds need to open up. I don't mean a bomb. I mean, the heavens need to stop.
But it's okay, so they foreclosed the two-state solution. They foreclosed the one-state solution. What's left? Genocide.
Right.
That's... Because what happened was Ariel Sharon, he said, I'm never going to allow the Palestinians to have a state, but instead what I'm going to do is unilateral withdrawal. Because these people are all freaks about the demographic question. I think there's 7.5 million Palestinians, 7 million Israelis. There are about 7 million each, but roughly comparable. But the Israeli freaks are always worried about demographics. If we give the Palestinians, if we have a single state, the Palestinians will outvote us. They will control us, blah, blah, blah. And so Ariel Sharon's whole thing was, I will never give the Palestinians a state, but instead what I'm going to do is just unilaterally withdraw, and then we'll put up some fences, and then we'll just kind of leave them to do whatever. And that's what he did. He withdrew out of Gaza. He had Israeli settlers forcibly removed from Gaza by the military. And then he had a stroke later, and Pat Robertson said it was God's divine justice.
Interesting.
For withdrawing from Gaza, because Pat Robertson believed that, it's important that Israel has Gaza so that they can bring about the end times. But unilateral withdrawal didn't work because it's just in the case of Gaza, you're just pulling out and you're leaving these people in a prison. They blockaded Gaza. They, barely let any food or medicine in there, periodically bombed it, and of course... They respond with October 7th because you can't keep, 2 million people in prison forever. They're eventually going to try to get out. So it's unilateral withdrawal didn't work. What option is left except genocide, or ethnic cleansing?
And you think they're really going to try to kill all 2 million people?
I don't think they're going to try to kill everyone. I think they're just going to try to kill. I think at this point, if there is an Israeli strategy, it's to kill enough people that the Palestinians will leave.
And letting them leave though.
That's what I'm getting. Yeah, it's it seems like it's no longer an option.
Well, as of right now, nobody will take them.
Yeah.
And of course the Israelis use this to justify the murder. They say, oh, nobody wants these people because they're terrorists, blah blah blah. But it's nobody wants to be complicit in an ethnic cleansing. This is their land. I mean, a lot of their ancestors were forced out in 1948. They've been there for, a long time. They shouldn't have to leave.
Right.
Of course.
But I think that's, at this point, the Israeli strategy is just to make life so horrific for them and give them the choice between death or leaving. And then they'll take the land and they'll settle it. And I don't think they'll get away with it. I think it is the most evil thing we've seen in the 21st century, which is why I do think it's worth, having a serious episode on a comedy podcast just to talk about this.
But it's evil and it's like stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's like kids movie evil. It's a little much.
Even like the Holocaust was like pretty stupid.
Yeah, it's like
you got to
like
build
from
all
a
those
child's brain.
Yeah. Let's just get rid of them all. You got to build all those. You got to build all the trains. You could be using those trains for good.
Yeah.
And you're doing that.
Yeah. Come on. Think about the karma. Silly.
We should have a barbecue when Biden dies, though. We should have it like right in at Brooklyn Bridge Park, where people will jog by and get upset. We'll just put up big banners that say like the child killer is dead. I want to do that.
I'm down.
Yeah, everybody's invited.
Yeah.
Brooklyn Bridge Park, the day after he dies. Well, you know what? My cleaning lady made a piñata for my kid's birthday. She made a Leonardo piñata. So we'll do like a Biden piñata.
Oh, I like
and we'll fill it with not
shit.
candy because we're
our own
adults.
shit. We'll start shitting now in the cup, and we'll keep so it'll be the three of our shits.
We'll fill it with our own
in
shit.
one big Biden
Diet red.
Yeah.
And then when the media comes, we're like, we don't talk to media.
Like, shit is pouring on them. They didn't think this out much.
Talk to our media liaison over there. We don't like. It looks like you. She's like. It appears that they've filled up the Joe Biden piñata with shit.
So the goal
And
is
they're
to break
beating
it,
it
but
with-
then shit will pour on you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We don't talk to
Yes.
the press. Talk to our media liaison. It's just my dog. It's my dog with a party hat on his head.
Yeah, and just like a couple other things about the money. According to the book, as of the time it was written, between 20 and 60% of the money for Democratic candidates for president come from Jewish Americans. Kind of explains the bipartisan nature of Israel's support. APAC, after the second Intifada started in 2000, APAC tripled their spending on college programs.
Okay.
Which they really did view the campus as like a...
What's that, like Birthright?
Yeah, Birthright, but also like there's these groups like the Canary Mission monitors, quote, anti-Semitism on campus. But it's basically if you're an Israel critic on campus, they'll publish your photo and dox you and accuse you of anti-Semitism and all sorts of things. And there's various groups like that.
The Birthright thing is so annoying because it's like you were 18, you got your dick sucked. That's the only reason you like this place.
Yeah, it is silly.
So like, in terms of what else I took notes on, there's like kind of a little bit about the general history. There's espionage. They spent a lot of time about Israel as racist. It's like, it's a well-written book, but it's just kind of like very thorough. It's like a professorial lecture. It took me a little bit to get through it because they'll be like, people say...
There's nothing in there about a Joe Biden piñata filled with blood and diarrhea.
The book will be like, people say the U.S. supports Israel because it's the moral thing to do. And then it's like, here is 2 or 3 pages of Israeli war crimes. People say the U.S. supports Israel because public opinion supports Israel in the U.S. Here is a bunch, 2 or 3 pages of U.S. public surveys showing actually people are like very divided, in some cases quite against Israel. And even that was back in 2007. It's much more against Israel now. And it just kind of goes on like, they'll just kind of put the other arguments forward, spend 2 or 3 pages showing you the evidence. And so it's well written, but it's like a very thorough kind of professorial type of book. It's not a fun read.
Sure.
But it's very informative. But so like racism, just, for an example, like Israel's always talked about as the only liberal democracy in the Middle East or, similar liberal democracy to us, they point out there is no equal rights law in Israel. Like, it's a racist state. And like in the United States, we have the 14th Amendment, what's called the Equal Protection Clause. And that says in the Constitution, under the law, no matter your race, gender, blah, 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 you are supposed to be treated equally by the law. Doesn't always happen that way, but it's on the books. Nothing like that in Israel. And in fact, a majority of the Israeli public are opposed to having something like that in Israel. In 1992, the Knesset tried to adopt some sort of equal protection under the law into Israel, and it it was withdrawn because of opposition.
What's the explanation that they don't want? It's like, you ever see that video of those people mad when they banned drinking while driving?
Yeah.
And he's like, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
Damn.
And then they go through these different polls. In 2007, a poll found 55% of Israelis believe in segregated movie theaters and entertainment facilities for Jews and Arabs.
Now, what is that? Because it's like, they're like, oh, yeah, there shouldn't be equal rights for the brown people, but I'm also going to dress up like brown people and pretend I'm in the desert and pretend I'm in, like, Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah, very cosplay.
Yeah, I mean, they're just kind of like old segregationists. 75% of Israelis in 2007.
It's almost like there's only one thing that'll fix that that bad place.
2007, 75% of Israelis in a poll said they wouldn't live in the same building as an Israeli Arab. Because that's the other thing in the West, in the U.S.
They would rent it to the Israeli Arabs.
They would hold his security deposit.
Yeah.
In the West or the U.S., they always say, "Oh, Israel, the Arabs have representation in parliament in Israel, or the Muslim Israeli," and it's like, yeah, but they fucking hate those guys. The majority of Israelis don't think they should be there. You know, I mean, it's a 2003 poll found 53% of Israelis oppose full equality for Arabs. It's a society, and it's like the trend has been more, not less, rightward. These are old polls. You know, I mean, it is an apartheid state. It's a state where the majority of people living there, by any poll, believe that the Arabs there should always be a minority, should always be less in number than the Jews, and that they should be essentially second-class citizens.
Yeah. And so when Joe Biden said if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to invent one, like, I don't know, what's the benefit to having that little country? Is it like just like a little outpost, or do they get to like keep tabs on the other countries that we're buying oil from? Like, what are the benefits?
Well, it's kind of interesting. Like Noam Chomsky, for example, he kind of didn't quite savage this book, but he said it overstated the lobby's importance and kind of dismissed it, which also kind of interesting in light of, you know, his connection to Jeffrey Epstein, who was almost certainly an Israeli intelligence agent running an Israeli blackmail operation. But, you know, Noam Chomsky and others, they talk about Israel as an attack dog for the United States. And the book concedes that was certainly the case at one point in history. Like in 1967, Israel had the 6-Day War where they beat Jordan, Syria, Iraq, sent forces, they beat them, and of course Nasser was the president of Egypt at the time. They beat Egypt too. And it's like these governments, especially Nasser in Egypt, the United States really did not like him because he was promoting pan-Arab nationalism, the idea that, and also secular pan-Arab nationalism, the idea that the Arabs should get together and form a coalition and, you know, they'd be a lot stronger together. They could be a threat to the oil if they all got together, you know. So the United States really didn't like that, and after 1967, they really liked Israel because they smashed that shit up. So it's like, yeah, historically, Israel has been an attack dog for the United States in the region.
Right. Because there's some countries in the region that they're like on better terms with, right?
Yeah, I mean, now, see, that's the other part of the book, is they argue, since the Soviet Union fell apart, you know, the collapse of communism in 91, they argue since that it's not at all clear that Israel has kind of served that role for U.S. strategic interests. And I think Chomsky is kind of in denial about that, or, you know, blackmailed into denial, or whatever the case may be. But basically, these states, like Nasser and Egypt, they were getting support from the Soviet Union. Soviet Union goes away, none of these states are getting support from the Soviet Union anymore. So what you see in the Middle East now is that there are a bunch of governments that are essentially U.S. client governments. Like, you know, two lies the Israelis commonly say are Israel is America's oldest ally in the Middle East, Israel is America's only ally in the Middle East. Both not true. U.S. Our first formal alliance in the Middle East was actually Turkey. They were included in NATO in 1952. Before the end of World War II, the U.S. really didn't do alliances for the most part. So they're not our oldest, and they're not our only one. Egypt today, Nasser is gone. Egypt is a U.S. client state under General Sisi. Like he is heavily dependent on U.S. aid. He, for the most part, does what we tell him. Jordan is a U.S. client state. For the most part, they do what we tell them. Syria, well, we tried to overthrow and have a civil. It's a separate tangent.
Let's get
for
to that a
Syria.
little later. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get to that later. But it's like, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, not quite a U.S. client state, but very much a very friendly U.S. government. It's not the case that Israel is our only ally there. And so their argument is like, now that pan-Arab nationalism's gone, now that the Soviet Union's gone, it seems more like the client state has not quite taken over, its sponsor, but has created a lobby that is so powerful it now bends U.S. Middle East policy towards the interest of the Israeli state rather than the U.S. state.
It's so funny that Chomsky was like, yeah, sure, Jeff, I'll come on the plane and hang out for a little bit. We'll go to I'll come to your townhouse and we'll have some drinks. And then Perenni's like, I don't want to go on the plane and have sex with children. Why would I do that? I'm not into children. I don't want to fuck a child.
I hope the listeners have listened to Michael Parenti lectures on YouTube because that is a very good impression.
Thank you.
Okay, Mike. You wop, suit yourself. We're just hanging out. We're just gonna go see Bill Maher.
I heard Michael Parenti's a hero of mine. He's currently has I believe dementia. Yeah. But like, people, I think he lives out on the West Coast, and some of his fans will still come visit him and stuff. But I've heard
oh my God, why? Leave him alone.
Yeah, you gotta visit a guy with dementia.
Yeah.
I'm your son. I'm just some fan.
Just imagine you're like 88 years old with dementia. Some guy with patches all over his jacket comes to your house.
Some Mark. Get out of
alone.
here, dude.
Hey, do you know about the Out for Smokes podcast?
But it's like,
Explaining podcasts.
This is just like a random thing I saw on Twitter. So of course I have no idea if it's true, and it could be slandering. But like somebody was saying that like they visited Chomsky they visited Parenti in his dementia stage, and he likes anti-Semitic jokes about Chomsky now, which is weird. Like you told a dementia guy an anti-Semitic joke about Chomsky, and he laughed at it.
Why even open that can of worms? Yeah.
But maybe that's just the dementia. I don't know.
I think it is.
But yeah, he's a hero.
Yeah.
Anyways.
God, you really love to just spill the beans on everybody, huh?
What? No, it's something I read on Twitter. Why would I not just broadcast it as if it's a factual thing?
Right, why are you repeating it on our show?
Yeah.
He loves to just like reveals everybody's fucking secrets. He's like my mother. He's literally my fucking mother. He just can't keep anything to himself.
Yeah, when I was sucking
outing people.
I was sucking
Why would you have to go there?
Cruising in Coney Island, and he told me that Michael Parenti likes anti-Semitic jokes.
4120, you can cut that out.
You're afraid of a let email?
I don't want it. What?
Yeah. Email?
Yeah, in all caps.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Everything from 4120.
No way, Jose.
No, it's great.
Don't even jot it.
Or you could just bleep it out. I mean, you're worse than my mother.
It's kind of fun though.
Why do you have to break the bro code? If I find out you were sucking dick in Coney Island, you think I would be broadcasting on the podcast?
Yeah, which has definitely been written on Twitter.
Johnny, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna cut the thing from 4120.
No, we're not.
Wait, why?
We're not gonna cut anything.
All right, whatever.
Yeah, no way.
Yeah, it's the only joke in this episode.
Yeah.
I made a couple.
No, you're right. Anyways, the point was,
bleep out when I say sucking dick.
You think Jewish people like have walked past this book and thought it was like a good thing?
Johnny, just bleep out the names.
Ooh.
Bleep out the...
Don't give Johnny work.
What, the Michael?
An unidentified leftist with dementia.
I think
an unidentified leftist who allegedly
not Parenti, the other guy.
In Coney Island.
Bleep out the other name, please.
In the middle of this, there should be a few pages of gray images we can look at. Okay?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Come on, get it together.
Yeah.
Yeah, people won't be able to tell when you did that high-pitched voice impression.
Well, he can... He starts it and then he's like,
Just
why do you
shits
put
all
on
over the
me?
cut, so you can't cut it. Anyways, look, the point is, the situation really changed after the end of the Cold War.
Uh-huh.
And their argument in the book is that while Israel might have served U.S. strategic interests as an attack dog against pan-Arab nationalism in the 60s and 70s and 80s to an extent, at least by the 90s, by the end of the Cold War, its lobby had become so powerful that it started kind of directing U.S. action. And, and it's like, I think we've kind of, for the most part, made the point, but they go through the case of Iran. I talked about Lebanon, the 2006 invasion, undermining a pro-U.S. government there. They talk about Iran. Actually, the Iranians in the 1990s really wanted to reconcile with the United States. They reached out to President Clinton. There was an oil deal in 1995 with this U.S. company Conoco that the Israeli lobby killed. Like Conoco said, we'll help develop the Iranian fields. Iran specifically picked a U.S. company to do this because they wanted to try to cool things off with the United States. In 1997, Iran elected a quote-unquote moderate president, Mohammad Khatami. He was elected in 1997, and he, one of his first things is he gives these speeches saying he wants reconciliation with the United States. And Clinton faced too much domestic pressure to change policy. He was... the 1998 midterms were coming up. If he starts being nice to the Iranians, all of a sudden, all the Israel lobby goes the other way. It goes against the Democrats. So, and it talks about these weaponized anti-Semitism charges. Jimmy Carter wrote a book in, I believe, the early 2000s about Israeli apartheid. Abe Foxman, the former head of the Anti-Defamation League, calls Jimmy Carter an anti-Semite. Kenneth Roth, I think he still is, the head of Human Rights Watch.
I'm so glad that word doesn't mean anything anymore. That and terrorism.
Kenneth Roth was the Jewish director of Human Rights Watch. He accused, detailed, or Human Rights Watch detailed, numerous Israeli war crimes in the 2006 invasion of Lebanon. In response, there was an op-ed in the Jerusalem Post that accused Kenneth Roth, the Jewish director of Human Rights Watch, of blood libel. Abe Foxman of the ADL called him an anti-Semite. So it's there's a discourse element to it, but then there's also the money element and the political lobbying element that kind of keeps these things online. But so it's we went through Lebanon, we went through Iran. The APAC in 2007, they killed a bill that would have required congressional approval for a U.S. attack on Iran because they wanted the U.S. president to just have the option to unilaterally go after Iran. And they pushed what was called the quote-unquote dual containment strategy in the 1990s, which was the U.S., as I mentioned, kind of kept forces offline and played these regional powers against each other. But Israel in the 90s pushed the U.S., the book argues, into what's called dual containment, where they first contained both Iraq and Iran, and then they invaded Iraq and continued even when these moderates were elected in Iran in 97. They continued containing Iran because Israel just doesn't like Iran, doesn't want the U.S. to have a reconciliation with Iran. And the book details that APAC lobbied members of Congress to vote for the Iraq War in 2002. That the Israeli intelligence cooked up a lot of the WMDs. Like Cheney and those guys, they set up an office called the Office of Special Plans in the Pentagon because they weren't getting what they wanted from CIA intelligence, so they're like, oh, let's just do raw intelligence. And they had Ahmed Chalabi of the Iraqi National Congress. I think that's... he was making up all sorts of shit, but also the Israelis were feeding them a bunch of shit that, Cheney would go on Meet the Press and repeat this bullshit about WMDs. And they got a lot of that from the Israelis. The Israelis, the book argues essentially Israel didn't initially conceive the Iraq war, but it joined forces with neocons to sell it and was a major factor in getting so much bipartisan support for the Iraq war in the United States was the Isreal Lobby. And the book argues with Syria, Israeli policy to Damascus largely determines U.S. policy, not vice versa. Bill Clinton tried to negotiate a peace deal with Assad Sr. and Israel in January 2000, but Israel backed off due to widespread public opposition to returning the Golan Heights. Israel annexed the Golan Heights from Syria. They got it in the 1967 war. 70-some% plus of the Israeli public oppose giving back the Golan Heights, even if it means a peace treaty with Syria. And apparently Obama also kind of came close to a peace treaty, but again, the Israeli lobby kills it. So the point the book makes is, like, in terms of a long-term U.S. strategy for the Middle East, the U.S. has had all these opportunities to kind of, what do you want to call it, divide and conquer, or even just reconcile, or even just come to a deal with states like Iran or Syria. Book makes the point, Iran is a fundamentalist Islamic Persian country. Syria is a secular Arab country.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they should not be so close together.
Mm-hmm.
And they make the argument. And it's like,
I guess the way you got to think of it is, like, if you're a guy who lives in Utah and you have 4 wives, you know, you don't want all the wives talking shit about you. You got to give some of the wives, like, 1 or 2 of them special treatment.
yes,
Make them feel like they're more special.
that's
or whatever.
exactly what
and
they
then
say in the book.
demonize one of them. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like, people criticize John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt, or people on the left do, because it's like, these are, I mean, I guess you could call them pro-empire, pro-imperialism, or they used to just
right.
They used to just be called the realist school of foreign policy, which is like most associated with Henry Kissinger. Kind of, you know, we'll deal with the world as it is, as opposed to the neoconservatives who thought you could just invade places and install democracies.
Mm-hmm.
Kissinger realists are more like, well, he's a bastard, but he's our bastard. Let's kind of, you know, play various states off against each other. Let's divide and conquer. Let's, you know. So it's like, these guys are not socialist liberals or whatever. They're just looking at, in terms of long-term maintenance of the U.S., the three strategic interests in the Middle East are keep the oil flowing, stop the spread of WMDs, minimize anti-U.S. terrorism. And so they're arguing that there are all these opportunities that various presidents wanted to seize to kind of divide and conquer the Middle East, or at least have better relations with Syria, have better relations with Iran, or Iraq for that matter. There's all these different opportunities, or Lebanon, all these different opportunities that Israel has, or the Isreal Lobby, because of its great influence in the United States, has sabotaged in order to promote the interests of the Israeli state over the interests of the U.S. state. And then, you know, that brings us up to Gaza, because, like, everything that Biden has tried to do with getting the global South on side of the United States against Russia, China, whatever, all of that is completely undermined by Gaza, because they are very justifiably horrified at what they're seeing U.S. weapons and U.S. money being used for in Gaza. Just, again, I think the worst crime so far of the 21st century. And so, like, you can call these guys imperialists or whatever. They're not
early in the 21st century.
Yeah. See, that's the thing. It's like,
Yeah.
There's
It's
a-
gonna set a precedent for
there's a horrifying future where Gaza starts a chain of
Yeah.
things that are worse than Gaza coming after
because
it.
you can
And
just get away with it because there's no God.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's just really seems like a nightmare world to live in. But my point is, like, you can call these guys imperialists or whatever, but I think their analysis is correct. I think Noam Chomsky and some people who essentially say that the U.S. controls Israel, not vice versa.
You're
I think
saying
they're
you're not
wrong.
a leftist anymore now that you're making Patreon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's like, regardless of their personal politics, I think the analysis in the book is correct, and I think it provides the best explanation I've seen for what's currently happening in Gaza, which is a genocide that the U.S. government, despite pretty widespread domestic opposition in the U.S., nobody in the U.S. government is doing anything to even mildly restrain this at all. And the power of APAC and these various organizations that make up the Isreal Lobby in the U.S. political process, I think, is the best explanation I have found. And it's not that Israel controls the United States per se. It's that they have a relationship with the United States that no other country does, to the point where they're not quite a client state anymore. They are able to throw their weight around and promote their own state interests in the Middle East in a way that no other state in the world currently is able to do within the U.S. political system.
Mm-hmm. I think George Carlin said one time in an interview that, like, he was like, the only way I see the world getting any better is with, like, some sort of massive bloodshed. You know, it'd be funny if they made if you became dictator and you're like, all right, we have to execute these 500 people, not because they're Jewish, but because they're in APAC. Do you remember a few years ago, by the way, there was some Israeli guy asking, or I think he was like an Orthodox guy, and he was asking Eric Adams how he felt about Israel, and Eric Adams was like, "Oh yes, I love Israel," and the guy was like, "And where would you live? You could live anywhere in Israel." And Eric Adams goes, "In the Golan Heights."
You just get blown up by Hezbollah or whatever.
Yeah. Now, why does the average Israeli care about the Golan Heights so much if they already have like a house and what? I don't know. Why are people so? I never think about land. I never think about the land that I'm on, the land that I possess.
Yeah, no, I never looked at any piece of land and
Never.
thought of ownership
That's
or
mine.
conquering. I just get happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I go,
I don't give,
wow.
like-
I get to be a part of this, not like
Yeah.
it gets to be a part of me.
I don't give a fuck
Yeah.
about the Golan Heights.
No.
Figure out who you guys. It's between y'all. Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah, I mean,
That's between y'all.
some of them are just like fundamentalists who believe like religiously in an ersatz, greater Israel. They believe, the Bible said this is all our land, or not the Bible, but, the Old Testament, blah, blah, blah. This is all our land. This was given to us by God. We would be insulting God if we gave back even an inch of it. That's like, that's part of it. And then, there's just a lot of bloodthirsty psychopaths who've, when you abuse somebody, you kind of have to think of a reason you're doing it, because you can't, otherwise you're a bad person.
Yeah, and
So-
you can't stop or the lie gets exposed. And
Right.
So,
So
you
it's
continue
like,
the abuse until they go away.
so it's slavery, for example, creates our particular American form of racism because you have to justify why these people are slaves. And in Israel's case, the abuse of the Palestinians creates a society of just really hateful monsters who have a very warped view of Arabs and Muslims
Yeah.
and Persians, and so a lot of it is just kind of creating a violent society in the culture that trickles down. And I did want to mention, the book talks about, with regards to Syria would come to these negotiations with the U.S. Like, they talked very seriously with President Clinton, and they would say, like, we'll stop funding Hezbollah, we'll stop helping Hezbollah, we'll stop, funding or helping Hamas, or, and Iran has kind of made similar offers. And because Israel keeps thwarting these rapprochements, that funding continues. And as long as the funding continues, that's Israel says, oh, we have to fight Iran or Syria or whoever because they're funding Hamas, they're funding Hezbollah.
God, they
It's
really are like a toddler with a gun, right?
Yeah, there's this old
Just fucking everything up. Just take the gun away.
Yeah, they really do like to cry out in pain as they strike you.
Yeah.
Some sort of saying that
Yeah.
was made somewhere. I don't really know the exact source.
Yeah. I was also thinking about, imagine Noam Chomsky making small talk with a teenager before he has sex with her. And he's like, back in my day, you could see a movie for a nickel. Lemon drops were, you could get a box of lemon drops for a penny.
Yeah.
You're very mature for 15.
And I guess just for solutions, the book
Kind of an old soul.
The book just talks about solutions like if you have campaign finance reform in the U.S. and take money out of politics, APAC and such would be less influential. But they also say more open debate and knowledge of history would help. And hopefully this has done a little bit to contribute to that.
Good luck.
Yeah, I know. But, I mean, it's like they talk in an interview recently, they did talk about, like, since the book has come out, the discourse has changed, but
Yeah.
U.S. policy has not changed.
Yeah.
But hopefully eventually it'll kind of follow from it, because APAC and these people, they do use a really kind of bastardized, ridiculous version of history
Yeah.
where, everything starts on October 7th. Nothing before that is ever addressed or mentioned or relevant. And
That'd be kind of cool if our podcast became, if the U.S. became like a left-wing dictatorship and our podcast was required listening, and kids in school are like, they just talk about erectile dysfunction a lot.
Oh, last fact from the book. The U.S. Government Accountability Office report said Israel, quote, conducts the most espionage operations against the U.S. of any ally. They quote some, like, Department of Justice guy who said that, like, one of the biggest time spent at his job was investigating Israeli spying operations against the United States. And there's, Jeffrey Epstein was not a universally acknowledged example, but I think an example. But it is just kind of a question. It's like, if this is the U.S. client, if this is our
that's so annoying.
if this is our like little attack dog,
We're giving them money and they spy on
they
us.
spy on us.
Yeah.
They allegedly blackmailed Bill Clinton. Epstein visited Clinton, and they were. They had like spy equipment set up like outside the Trump White House and stuff. I mean, you see all these stories. Like it's
I bet
crazy.
they got nothing on him, though. Please, President Trump, please save us. We know you're too strong to be blackmailed by the Isreal Lobby. We know you would never do those horrible things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's about, those were my main takeaways from the book. I do recommend it if you're looking to kind of understand what's going on and what we're seeing in current U.S. policy. And I appreciate you guys, you the listener, listening. Be back with something more silly next week, but we hope this was informative and interesting. And over on the Patreon, we'll have something about the finders, patreon.com/outforsmokes. But I don't know. Was there anything else,
Hell
you
yeah.
guys?
Thanks for listening.
No, thanks, Sean.
No, thanks, Sean.
All right. Thank you guys for listening.
Wait. I got some dates. My special is still up on YouTube right now. It's called I'm Normal. I got Charlotte, June 2nd. I got Irvine and Oxnard, June 5th and 6th. And then I got Fort Worth, Texas on June 14th. You can get your tickets at MikeRacineComedy.com. Thanks for listening. Please join us over on Patreon. $5 a month gets you an extra episode every single week. And we will see you guys next week or over on Patreon. Bye-bye.